they made mistakes, and one of them was right in front of me one time, and I hit him, and he just started coming apart, and I had to maneuver drastically to avoid hitting him or pieces of the airplane. I was born and raised in Wilmot, South Dakota. Small town, big lake nearby. I started off in open cockpit, canvas and wood, biplane, N3N Navy airplane. It would fly rather low. It would go around 8,000 feet at about 80 knots. And eventually I fly airplanes at Mach 2 and went to 76,000 feet one time with a moon suit, the pressure suit. And once I got up there, cut the pressurization to the airplane, and boom, Michelin man. Normally, we had a task force of carriers in the Korean venture, and we were primarily operating out of the 38th parallel, which was the demarcation between North and South Korea. And in that position, we could work with our ground forces. They were pretty much at that time in 1952 settled into a ground fight along that area. And as such, the Navy pretty much had the responsibility for the eastern half of North Korea. The Air Force was operating pretty much on the western half. Well, we didn't really have the range to normally operate in far north of Korea, so they had a lot of warehousing, supply storage and stuff up there that we paid little attention to. So the powers that be decided that we ought to divert up there and hit some of these targets. So they formed a task force of 7 carriers and another 20 ships, and we went up to operate about 100 miles at sea off Chongjin area, which is one of the major North Korean cities. Our targets were right on the Yalu. Yalu was the demarcation between North Korea and the Soviet Union at that part. As you go further to the west, it was communist China. But so we went up there intending to do real heavy destruction of North Korean assets. We went up this one time, and I was on the first flight of the day, and forces from all 3 aircraft carriers, and my target was at the city of Horyong, which is on the Yalu River. And I came back from that, I was told, to get ready for the next flight. So I had a quick lunch, and I got briefed with 3 other guys, normal operation, and we fly on flights of 4 airplanes. And we were going up as a combat air patrol. And we were briefed by our intelligence officer, and in general, they told us not to be much concerned about enemy aircraft because they just didn't fly out over the ocean. Well, snow, blizzard, clouds down to 400 feet, messy day. And we took off and joined up under the clouds, and then climbing through the clouds to 12,000 feet, we got a call from our combat air patrol that there were inbound unknown aircraft, bogies, at about 80 miles at that time. When we got on top of the clouds at 12,000 feet, I noticed a flight of 7 contrails, the little cloud that airplanes put out at high altitude, so they were extremely high. About that time, the flight leader, Lieutenant Elwood, had a warning light that it was a precaution, but a fuel warning light. And he was instructed to fly back, remain over the task force with his wingman. So I had my wingman with me. Incidentally, this was put together with a group of people who hadn't flown together before. I hadn't flown with any of these or trained with them in any way. So I had a wingman that I didn't know much about, but as they flew over me, I identified them as 7 MiG-15 aircraft, not knowing their origin or anything, but they were coming right out of the north, and that would be Soviet Union. So I proceeded in their direction, climbing to 26,000 feet. Immediately I charged my guns and checked all the fighting systems, and they were ready to go. As they passed over, they turned around and were flying back from whence they came. And I got to 26,000 feet, and they split into two groups, going left and right. And I thought probably to land, but no, it was to bracket me. So I lost sight of them when they got out of the contrail level, and our Combat Information Center lost them on the radar. So they vectored me to come back and establish a barricade in the air between the last sighting of the MiGs and the task force. Well, while proceeding in those orders, in turn, here come 4 of them right out of my 10 o'clock position and firing. And I turned into them and locked onto their tail end band and shot a short burst, and he dropped out of formation. When he did that, my wingman left me and followed this guy down. I reported that somewhat, and they said, "Do not engage." And they didn't want to fight. And it was a surprise, a real surprise. It had never happened. They don't fly over the ocean. And furthermore, as we learned, these were Soviets, and they had never Russian airplanes. And they just didn't come out of Russia and engage us in any way before. So I said, I am engaged, and there wasn't any way I could drop out, because with their capability, anything I did, if I were just going to straighten out and dive or something, they'd be right on me. So I remained at 26,000 feet in full throttle for the next 35 minutes, which is longer than any air-to-air combat fight I've ever heard of. But then the other 3 that went in the other direction joined in, so I'm alone with 6. At that time, the MiG-15 was the best fighter airplane in the world. And my airplane was very good for air-to-ground work, but it was not really in the same realm with the MiG. It had more power, it could out-climb, it could out-dive, it could go faster, turn. So plane on plane, I was at a distinct disadvantage. And as it turned out, my wingman, though I didn't see him again, evidently something was wrong, but he never fired a shot. And I fired all I had, ran out of ammunition, and so I had lots of opportunities. But right away, the flight of 4 that just lost their tail end Charlie climbed dramatically, to which I couldn't keep up. But they went on up a couple of thousand feet above me, turned to come back in, and I was climbing as best I could, planning to shoot the guy down if I could that had just lost his wingman. He was the single. He was in the sun, and as I was trying to track him, I kind of lost sight of him, but I noticed the other 2 airplanes had made a turn and were coming at me, so I switched my attention and aim of the airplane into them. And the first airplane was shooting at me. And as I got my sights on him, I fired a short burst and he broke away. But I looked over at his wingman and he was coming at me, and I adjusted to now aim at him, and he was shooting at me. And so when I was ready tracking him, I fired, and he quit. But he kept coming and he slid right underneath me, and I fired until he was no longer a target. So that was the situation, and I was on automatic. I was doing as trained. I trained into him, and from then on, it's freelance. Is what do? Do they make a maneuver, and you make a maneuver? And since the combination of problems I was facing, I pretty much stayed full power at 26,000 feet and countering each of them. They broke from formation to where they're now just taking their turn shooting at me, one airplane at a time. And then, wisely, most of them would shoot, and then before crossing in front of me or anything, pull up abruptly, and I had no way to attack him. However, on some occasions, I did. They made mistakes, and one of them was right in front of me one time, and I hit him, and he just started coming apart, and I had to maneuver drastically to avoid hitting him or pieces of the airplane. But as the fight ended eventually, he came up, and I was seriously damaged with lots of holes in my airplane, but primarily a 37 millimeter right into the wing butt, and exploded into the engine accessory section and took out all my hydraulics and severed the cables to the aileron. Aileron was hydraulically controlled, and it got rid of all the hydraulics, and it cut the wire to my rudder. So I basically was flying with an elevator. And so just before that, I had an airplane, a MiG, smoking, and I was on his tail, and he was dropping that out and going slower and on his way down, and I ran out of ammunition. So this is a different category now. I had no purpose to remain up there, but this guy slid in right behind me, and as I turned to battle with him, he took a lot of my capability away with holes in my airplane, and luckily I was aimed directly toward the task force, and though we were in clear area, no clouds, the cloud storm area was now in my sight, and as I head back to the task force. And so I'm diving in the sky, this ideal gunnery range, sitting on my tail, just shooting away, but I'm using my rudder or elevator stick to jam it forward and pull it back, so I'm just going like this, and I'm seeing all these bullets over me, then under me and over me, but I got into the clouds. But at that time, assuming, but I know it's true, and I just didn't see him, but my wingman's back there on his tail, but his guns didn't fire. So this guy followed me into the clouds, and we lost sight of each other, and my next thought is, how bad off am I, and am I going to have to jump out of this airplane? And if I did, it would be all over. It would not been recovered. I would last maybe at most in my immersion suit built for survival in cold water conditions. I'd probably last at most 20 minutes, and they wouldn't be able to get a helicopter or anything to me during that time. So I stayed with it and flew instruments and taking charge of whether something's going on and I'm going to have to jump anyway, no matter, at any moment. But that didn't happen. So I knew the bottom of the clouds, and I just led on down till I was underneath and in the blizzard below. And I was zeroing in on the task force, talking to the ships, Combat Information Center, then over to the landing signal officer and so forth, to be prepared to land. hopefully. So I'm approaching under the clouds, and there's this ring of ships, and unfortunately they were at general quarters expecting an attack from these airplanes, and guns free, meaning they have the choice to shoot if they any target enemy airplane comes in unidentified. So I was unidentified and they shot at me. But my commanding officer was just taking off to relieve me to go up and attack the MiGs if able. So he saw what was going on and he called off the destroyers from shooting at me. So my next problem was to find out if I was capable at all to land on a carrier in those conditions. Well, I found out that at 170 knots that the airplane would stall and I'd lose control of it. And the little control I had both hands on the stick to overpower the lack of hydraulics and so forth, and I was getting pretty tired. But I found that, 170 knots is going to be at, and normally it would be 105. So this had never been done before, and in an airplane that was otherwise pretty bad off. My problem was I didn't have the capability to maneuver over and come back and be aligned with the ship, which is into the wind. And I'm passing this to the landing signal officer, and I'm telling him I can't fly the airplane below 170 knots. And he said to the captain, "Can you kick it up?" The captain said to him, "He's up on the bridge running the ship. Bring him in any speed you want," because we were in a storm. We had big winds, and then he could apply another 30 knots of ship speed. So I don't know how much wind we had across the deck, but I said, "I can't line up," and he said, "We'll cut you for an early wire." That wasn't very giving me assurance that this was going to work right. But in any case, if I just went over the side, at least I'm right there and they can put boats in the water and a helicopter and whatnot and probably rescue. But then I couldn't line up, and he says, "Cut you for the early wire." And the captain of the ship, never heard of it before or since, turned the ship and lined it in the direction for me to be right down, lined up with the ship for landing. And I came on in under landing signal officer control and caught a number 3 wire, and pretty much normal from that point.